Hello friends, my name is Host Eric. I'm the host of Talking with Famous People, and in this video I'm going to cover the two primary objections that I think are raised about defensible typology, which is a term I use to refer to the explication of typology that I have come to present after, some failed efforts over the course of the last few years. And to the exclusion of other typological interpretations. I advocate in favor of the adoption of defensible typology to the exclusion of other typological systems. And so I think that there are two primary objections people raise about this, but they don't necessarily do a great job of noting what it is they're objecting about in a way that communicates effectively with me. So I'm not exactly sure how this document emerged yesterday as I was musing about things, but in retrospect it seems intended to translate people's objections into a format that I myself can understand better and respect more. Or to, potentially you could say, steel man the framing of defensible typology. So if you were to break the issue into these two resolutions, you'd cover most of all the arguments that people might be making against my central claims, which are established here in these resolutions. Resolution A, a world where defensible typology comprises the dominant paradigm, quote unquote, is preferable to the status quo. In Resolution B, it's possible to communicate defensible typology in a way that attains the preferable world affirmed in Resolution A. So, I frame these things as my affirmations, specifically in ways that allow, in the first case, conceptual arguments against it, and in the second case, utilitarian and practical arguments against it. So let's look at some questions that I would raise if I were addressing Resolution A from a negationary perspective. So first, we need a clear definition of what's required, what comprises the dominant paradigm. And I phrased it that way in Resolution A. What I mean is metaframe, but metaframe plus widespread adoption of that as under its terms as the metaframe. So what is a metaframe then? Well, a metaframe is, I would define it, is that which contains within it a capacity to explain everything else, which is to say it subsumes every other frame insofar as it comes before or is more foundational to a question than whatever the question itself, whatever framing is contextually appropriate for the question itself. To exemplify this, or as a means of clarifying, you would say that like desired experience comprises a frame for vacation decision making. You can make decisions based on lots of factors such as cost, efficiency of travel, or comfort of travel, or there's lots of different things you can predicate a decision on. But if you forget the fundamental purpose of your vacation is to have a good vacation experience, then no matter how well you decide on the case level, you're never going to be well served by those decisions because you haven't checked to remember to make sure that it's consistent with your overarching frame of reference, which is you're going on vacation because you want to have a happy experience in general, not because you want to be miserable, right? So in that case, so far in the world, we don't really have anything that works successfully as a metaframe. We've got a few things that attempt to be like a metaframe. Essentially, determinism, which claims that every human behavior, action, thought, etc., can be explained as an inevitable consequence of a uh, a a flood of different causes plus the mechanical processes of being a human being, right? So that would be something that attempts to be a metaframe, but for a variety of reasons that I don't want to go into, it falls apart. My contention is that cognitive functions, understood correctly, provides the metaframe and that it subsumes all other questions. So if you're asking a question about the physics of a falling object, cognitive functions is non-informative about it, but it nevertheless comes before or subsumes whatever it is you're talking about. So the specifics are the object, the vectors, etc. The frame for that is the physics, the part of physics that explains how to do the math on those things and why it's done that way. The metaframe addresses the fact that this event of physics is occurring by one or more agents, and they have their own reasons for prioritizing doing this kind of thing versus other kind of things, and they're doing it in a certain way that's demonstrative of this kind of attention or that kind of attention. So it comes before the question that they want actually considered, and is non-informative of the question that they want considered. But that doesn't matter. It still qualifies by my criteria as a metaframe because it subsumes it or comes before. The question of what these individuals are doing is as foundational as you can get, as opposed to an object of analysis being cognated about. It's about an event of cognition, so it's a more foundational level or above in terms of framing. So arguments could be made that defensible typology is not comprehensive enough to do that job. That in fact there are certain things that it fails to subsume. I disagree with that, and I would simply pose to anybody who wants to present something as not subsumed by cognitive functions, then go right ahead. I can present something that's not informed by determinism at all, such as emergent phenomena like termite mounds. It's because it's impossible to articulate any specific threshold of that needs to be attained before the manifestation of the thing occurs. It's not possible to even establish that a web of causality might be responsible for it without undermining the meaning of causality entirely, in other words, making it non-replicable. So it's easy to see examples, counterexamples of other things that attempt to be metaframes. But the reality is there aren't any metaframes in the status quo because cognitive functions is the one correct metaframe. And so as a consequence, smart people are going to be very skeptical of the claim that there is a metaframe at all. So if they wanted to argue that there is no such metaframe, and this is getting into 2b, in the status quo there's no metaframe, and people exist conceptually in that stark desert, which is to say they can't conceive of what a metaframe might look like because there is no one currently. And so the very concept that we always begin with the agent or the observer, the individual, runs counter to most people's notions of what sort of sciencey kind of thinking is, which is attempting to detach the observer from the process in order to avoid individual bias creeping in. But in fact, if we want to analyze all of human experience, all of reality, we need something that begins with the fact that reality always emerges as a function of and as understood by, expressed about by, or manufactured by in some way, manifest of an individual human being's agency. You could get into agency of animals if you wanted to, but it's not complicate things. So one argument against the idea that cognitive functions comprised of metaframe might be that metaframes themselves are inherently impossible. But if you were going to make that claim, then you'd either need to define a metaframe differently than I'm defining it, or you need to explain why cognitive functions doesn't meet the criteria I've established for a metaframe, or why something else does. It's possible, conceivably, to make some sort of link between anything and anything else, but that doesn't exemplify the framing relationship I'm talking about, which is a specific thing, and you can either exemplify or not. Okay, now let's go on to exclusivity. So one of my claims that I make is that defensible typology is exclusively correct and other typological explanations are wrong, and other explanations of personality besides cognitive functions are wrong. So the question should be raised then, can benefits be attained by other parsings of JCF? I say no, but a person arguing against me would be probably well served to try to get a utilitarian consideration bogged down here in this non-utilitarian resolution by arguing that all the benefits of understanding personality are particularist, and the individual who enjoys those benefits needs flexibility regarding how to interpret typology if they're going to be able to, even by your own understanding of typology, if they're going to be able to cognitively process these things in a way that benefit them. Whereas what you're trying to do here is take away that flexibility and render it less useful to multiple parties than it currently is, to the extent that somehow they came to terms that this is the dominant paradigm and accepted it regardless of their own interests. So that would be a good argument one could make. Basically, then you'd be having a ground battle or a definition battle. It's part of the framework as a ground, you know. Saying, should we define the benefits of understanding cognitive functions through some articulation of self-reporting or how people use it? Like, in other words, are cognitive functions like a back scratcher? It doesn't matter if you use it to scratch your back or some other part of your body. It just matters if it feels good to you. Or is it like a thermometer? If you put it under your armpit, it gives you the right temperature. If you put it, you know, on your leg, it doesn't. So the thing is, I claim that it's much the latter sort of thing, and that while there may be more than one spot where you can get the correct temperature, if you're getting the correct temperature in the wrong spot, you're doing so incidentally, and you shouldn't be put in charge of saying which spot the thermometer goes. Does personality necessarily have primacy as a frame of reference, as opposed to some sort of physics frame of reference? Well, sure, personality has primacy because everything begins with observation of an individual, and cognitive functions of the personality theory explains why individuals engage realities as they do, and not in some other way, and how that reality becomes manifest, whatever reality it is beginning at the beginning, namely the person who's attending to the matter. Okay, so we're almost done, but I've got one more thing here to show you. And I will show it to you right now. I only have one question for B, because I don't really want to go into Resolution B a great deal. Resolution B states, is it really possible for me to communicate the correctness of defensible typology in a way that people both can understand and can impact the world in some fashion? Well, what I was thinking when I was thinking about that question is it better to give people the right questions or the right answers? And my initial inclination was maybe it's better to give people the right questions. But then I thought, like, no, I know how this goes. I've been a school teacher long enough, you know. If you ask them, you know, well, for example, the question it prompted me to reflect on this at all was me saying in a video, a person who's saying anything should ask themselves first these questions. Why am I saying this rather than something else? And why aren't people listening to me? The problem is the answers to those questions that they're going to provide themselves are because what I'm saying is true and what other people are saying is false. And the second part is because they're dumb or whatever, you know, or they're wrong. So those are the answers you're going to get to those questions, even though those are not the correct answers, right? The correct answer to the question, why am I saying this instead of something else, is because of a combination of my particularized experience, but you can explain motivationally that my desire to have my ideation artifacts attain affirmation by others in public because of my FE third and E first is absolute values. You could explain my fixation on accuracy, correctness, or truth as my fifth slot absolute value NI, especially since I'm producing artifacts that are existent externally on the metaphysical field, like this video here. For it to resonate with me as acceptable, it needs to resonate with me as NI true. And also it explains why I persist in doing this for such a long time, even though there's no payoff for me that you can articulate from a third party perspective. It's my FI 7th absolute value. I like it. So, anyway, why aren't you listening to me? Well, if you made it at the end of this video, you are listening to me. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.